It is midday, outside is getting chilly but the sun is still warm. MA and me are in a small bare garden house. MA is visiting MI's thinking cabin. The cabin is located at the end of a busy city road. MA and me are in what MA is jokingly called the contemplating corner. The only distinguishable sound is the heating running next to them. Me proudly showed the warm environment to MA. The atmosphere is quiet and relaxed. MA's mind is distant, distracted by a recent writing assignment titled, The Code to Conduct. The following is an extract of that honest conversation. Who
are the stakeholders for you? In other words, who is affected by your transdisciplinary guidance?
My colleagues inside and outside the academic walls, the engaged public, the research community, and well, myself.
This is a quite vast pool of people. Why is that?
Collaborating with multiple partners means weaving together different knowledges, interests, and also weaving across institutions, each with their own logics, and across times and spaces. In addition to this, educators possess a democratic responsibility to a broader public, which I think transcends the political and economic interests. So, yeah, quite a vast pool of people.
It is quite a vast pool of quite a vast pool of people indeed. And on top of that, I'm also thinking that we are affected by the urge of working across transdisciplinary and from the response that our various peers and mentors are feeding us with. And then you season everything with an international mix of cultures and attitude, and the result is indeed quite flavored. Tentacular, if you like.
Tentacular?
Tentacular as opposed to linear, hierarchical, objective, and unambiguous.
How
does transdisciplinary guidance impact how we involve citizens and organizations in transdisciplinary educational practices?
I cannot find a general answer to that question. I think it varies all the time. Generally, I think we have to attempt to include them from the beginning of any collaborative project. It is important to allow them to lead and to contribute each with their expertise.
Yeah, but what about the differences in power and relationships that are inherently within different stakeholders?
Yeah, exactly. I was just getting to that. Power, that's interesting. How do we make stakeholders contribute in a fair, ethical, sound, and symmetrical manner when not all are able to engage on the same premises? Not all have equal capabilities and entitlements.
Yeah, that is interesting. Since the beginning of any successful collaboration is to build trust, transparency is essential.
But bear in mind that transparency is not always possible, no matter how hard we strive. Interests, desires, commitments, obligations, and power is not particularly transparent from the outset. Often we have to work with a blurred and opaque picture of the position of everyone rather than a transparent view. Moreover, roles, positions, interests also shift during the process.
Yeah, after all, power is dynamic and organic as collaboration. Is there more to that?
Wait, this is not the end point. If the collaboration cannot work organically, of course, guidelines, agreements, and boundaries, of course, need to be put into place. But generally, these mechanisms can be created only if a robust feedback mechanism is present. Transdisciplinary collaborations, I think, are not anthropomorphic, rational, masculine beings. They are like shapeshifters, tentacular beings, as you said.
In this tentacular process, how do you manage stakeholders' hopes, ambitions, and desires?
Collaborative partners, whether students, teachers, or whoever are in a dialogical relationship through clear conversation from the beginning until the end of the project and at designated points midway. Allowing the space for joint perspectives also enhances our awareness of ecological diversity. We are part of doing this sort of collaboration.
Yeah, often we are constantly trying to achieve consensus and avoid friction, while the primary reason we got together in the first place is that we are not being the same.
Yes, certainly. And indeed, ecologies are never without conflicts, friction, or strife. Quite the opposite. But what about you? How do you manage your hopes and desires with different stakeholders?
And the promise over deliver. It is important to acknowledge that conflictual processes are more of a rule than an exception, and any idea of symmetrical relations or position should be challenged. Perhaps we should not be so afraid of conflicts in collaboration, but rather think of them as opportunity to reflect and adjust the process. And often the friction that conflicts emerge from that, and often the friction that conflicts emerge from are exactly what produce the action, movements, and effects. What emerged to me as the constructive crystallization point is the outcome, after all.
Yes. And don't forget that what ties a successful collaboration together is above all that you trust the outcome, the common belief in a queer futurity, a performative that enables us to do and work together for and towards a future in which all involved trust and experience that they have something to gain, something to take away from the process. Perhaps it's not necessarily the same, but something that is leaving them in a better, more experienced, more enlightened, or more prosperous situation than before.
What?
Talking about a physical object that incorporates these mental processes, a code of conduct seems possible. What do you think about it? Can a code of conduct foster collaboration?
I think a code of conduct is probably only useful when it's fluid and constantly negotiated, and not when it's seen as some kind of rigid contract.
So it cannot be fixated, solidified, and purified into a code?
I guess not. Transdisciplinary collaboration is not unfolding on a geological plateau or landscape that can be navigated through itineraries and maps, and its obstacles are not mountain ridges and rifts. Its substance is dynamic, like the surface of the sea, rising tides, waves, constantly changing, or perhaps better, think about it as a living being that is dynamic and changing accordingly. Remember, we discussed the promise of queer futurity as a performative for working collaboratively. We talked about the tentacular as opposed to the linear and hierarchical, and we talked about shapeshifters like squids and octopuses, able to transform their body into unimaginable shapes, perhaps queer shapeshifters, were-squids, if you like, that might unexpectedly fall apart, transform their shape, transform into new directions you would never have thought of, or even turn against you.
Yeah, but sometimes I guess you just need more rigid guidelines, a clear management structure with feedback points, check-in moments, and awareness of the different power dynamics in play. A code of conduct that is both and neither all at once. Can it possess porous borders and strict guidelines at the same time? Yeah, I guess that would be an interesting question. No matter its shape and form, it should be discussed beforehand when the process starts, with regular checks, reflections, adjustments, revisions systemically incorporated. We should not be so afraid to shift plans if necessary. Ultimately, collaboration is, of course, what is trying to be stimulated. Collaboration replaces the wall of the educational institution. do we think that there are any other spaces and time in between these two almost opposite ends? I'm also wondering if there are any other tools that you can think of.
Oh, well, many, I guess. Radical openness, genuine curiosity, relational ethics, self-doubt, close listening, empathy, temporary suspension of judgment, engaged care. There are lots. Awareness of the point of contact and point of conflict there is with every relationship.
So the code of conduct can be an initial point of discussion to bring all this conversation to the table. But the draft of a code of conduct differs every time depending on the involved topics, expertise, and stakeholders. Perhaps the code of conduct should be drawn from scratch for every new transdisciplinary collaboration. Should we then make it into a mandatory rule?
Not a conclusion. MA and me quietly reflect on what is being said. MA has some interesting points to hang on for their article. They are wondering where the paper and pen are before all these ideas will just disappear.